We will log back in to our Grupo Gonzalez. You'll notice here that we've meanwhile added a logo, and we've added 2 menus here so you can see some of the flexibility of the system. These are 2 menus which I'm going to be using later, but of course, you can access any menus that you need right here also. On top of this, you have some icons here that get you exactly where you need to be right away with a single click. Now that we have provided access to employees and an employer to the e-services portal, and we've issued Social Security numbers to both individuals and a Social Security registration number, as well as an employer identification number for the employer, we can start to really use the e-services where they make a big difference. Filing and paying of contributions by employers and filing and paying for benefit claims. We'll start with the filing of contributions, which means the employer will report which employees have worked for them in this particular month, the month of April, and report how much the employees were paid, so that the system can calculate the resulting Social Security contributions for both employee and employer. In this particular form, the employer can also indicate if there is any sick pay provided to the employees during this particular reporting period. As usual, you will notice that the system automatically populates this entire form, which is a country-specific form, and it includes the details about each employee. It has their occupation, whether they're paid weekly or monthly, what their employee classification is, and more. The classification is, of course, specific to the Social Security and labor laws in the country. The Social Security contribution rates for both the employer and the employee are linked with this classification, so the system can determine the correct contributions automatically. As an employer, you don't need to do any data entry if there are no changes to be made, and all the data is correct. This particular scenario we are showing is one where the employer is late in filing their report because it is July already and they are filing for the month of April. Based on the rules in effect, there's a late filing fee applied automatically by the system. Since all the information appears correct, we can simply proceed by adding and then posting this form so it gets sent to the Social Security Administration's office. We have now completed the first step. We have filed a contribution return. In some countries, this may be called a tax return, and this has gone to the Social Security office. As a next step, we'll look at the view of the Social Security by logging in as one of their users. You'll notice that if I look at my contribution or tax returns, there is a new one right here. Once we click on it, we can find everything that we need to know about this filing. We will find the details about the 2 employees, Juliana and Manuel. In case there are timesheets which need to be filed by an employer for each employee, those timesheets would be visible here too. In addition to that, if there are any adjustments that have already been processed, you would see them here, but in our case there are none. In other words, I can just go ahead and approve this. I can also look at this same information from a different angle. As an authorized user, you can basically access this data from multiple angles. Different menus will ultimately bring you back to the same summary. Now we're going to go ahead and select the approver as well as the approval date. We will do the same steps now in order to post it, which basically will send it on to the next person. We're going to take you now through a complete cycle to process this contribution filing, starting with the initialization. During initialization, the system will pick up all of the filings that have been filed for this particular period of April 2022. Next, we'll proceed with a trial posting, which will allow us to view the impact of these transactions. Trial steps are meant to allow the user to see and evaluate the impact of a process and determine if this is what was intended. It allows the user to go back and correct anything that requires correction so that any issues can be resolved before there is an actual impact on the underlying data instead of afterwards when correcting things may require adjustment processes to be run. Once we post it, we can see all the details. In our case, the total comes to $19.50, and there is an additional late filing fee of $195, which will give us the total that you can see here. If the user notices anything that doesn't look right, then they can send it on for further review. Otherwise, you can proceed to the next step. Now you can view another register which gives you the same information as before, but it also shows you the difference between the current period and the last period. In my case, the last period did not have any filings, so the comparison doesn't really apply. If all that looks good, you can move on to the final posting. Final posting means we're going to now finalize these filings and accept them as final so they can be paid. Once the final step has been processed, you cannot change the Social Security contribution filing anymore. You're basically telling the system that based on your careful review, you have determined that everything is correct and final. So let's proceed with that then. Time to move on to the next step. Payments of contributions. Payments can come in online from the employers directly, or they can be made by employers that come to the Social Security Administration's office. Of course, they can also mail in the money or wire the money through the bank, etc. We'll show you one payment method here. Let's use an old school method where the employer actually appears in the office of the Social Security and comes to pay the amount due for the month of April. So the cashier in the Social Security Administration's office will receive the employer and take the payment then and there. They will look up the information in the system and find that there are payments due from the employer. If the amount being paid is not the same as what is actually pending, then the user can modify the amount received. Otherwise, you don't have to change anything and just indicate whether the payment was by check, cash, or maybe credit card. My example will be a check, so we can enter a check number and indicate the date when the money was received, and that's it. Since payments need to be carefully traced, this initial receipt will lead to additional steps to verify and approve and possibly audit the payment. Usually, you're going to have different people that verify that this payment is truly there and that it was definitely paid by the correct employer, etc. All this information can be tracked here. To keep it simple, we're going to say the payment was reviewed by Aaron and then it was checked and approved by Bertrand. We'll use today as the date for all these steps. At this point, we have a payment that has been received, reviewed, and approved already. In other words, we are able to proceed and post it, which means it's going to start updating all related records in the system so that we have a clear picture of where this money has gone. So let's go ahead and trial post this. As a result of this, we will be able to see registers for the payments and verify one more time, or we can proceed with the final posting at this time. Once we do that, no more changes will be allowed. Any changes after this would be considered adjustments. Since we've done the final posting, we can now take a look at statements reflecting the contributions that were paid on behalf of the employees by the employer. If I were to look for Mr. Manuel Gonzalez, I will find that there is a payment that has been applied for contributions for this individual coming from Grupo Gonzalez. That's exactly what I was hoping to find. With this entire process being finished, we can now go and close this period and move on to the next period for which we will be filing salary and contribution information.